Welcome back to History Unveiled. Today we're diving deep into one of the most chilling modern secret societies, a group that not only promised salvation through esoteric rituals and cosmic transcendence but also left a trail of tragedy in its wake. I'm talking about the Order of the Solar Temple. In this video, we'll explore everything from its mysterious formation in the 1980s to the mass suicides and murders of the 1990s, and examine what the group believed, how they operated, and what legacy they left behind. The Order of the Solar Temple, or OTS, was founded in 1984 in Geneva, Switzerland, by two enigmatic figures, Joseph di Mambro and Luc Jouret. The group was presented as a modern revival of the medieval Knights Templar, an elite order whose secrets had long captivated the popular imagination. But while the Templars once defended Christendom, di Mambro and Jouret's new order mixed elements of mysticism, esotericism, New Age philosophy, and even pseudo-scientific ideas in a bid to promise a transcendental escape from the mortal world. Di Mambro, a French jeweler with a troubled past and a penchant for occult ideas, and Luc Jouret, a charismatic Belgian homeopath and lecturer, combined their talents to build a secret society that attracted not only spiritually curious individuals but also many affluent, middle-aged professionals, many of whom came from Catholic backgrounds. Imagine a group that offers its members the chance to join an elite circle, promising access to secret knowledge and a glorious future beyond this world. This was the promise of the Solar Temple. At its core, the Order of the Solar Temple was built on an eclectic blend of ideas. Drawing inspiration from Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and New Age thought, the OTS reinterpreted ancient legends, mystic symbols, and even astronomical phenomena to craft its worldview. The group claimed descent from the Knights Templar, a legendary medieval order known for its secretive rituals and martial prowess. However, the Solar Temple was far removed from the knights in shining armor of history. Instead, di Mambro and Jouret appropriated the Templar mythos as a means of lending credibility and an aura of ancient mystery to their own modern movement. They fashioned themselves as custodians of hidden wisdom, promising that their initiates were the chosen few destined to inherit a higher spiritual destiny. One of the most unique, and ultimately fatal, doctrines of the Solar Temple was the idea of transit. Members were indoctrinated with the belief that the physical world was doomed to destruction and that the only way to survive an impending apocalypse was to leave behind their earthly bodies and ascend to a higher, more enlightened state of existence. According to the teachings of di Mambro, death was not an end but a transition, a journey to the star Sirius, where members would attain solar bodies and join the cosmic order. Imagine believing that your final act on Earth is not suicide but an ascension to a new, eternal life among the stars. For the followers of the Solar Temple, this promise was irresistible, a way to escape a world they saw as corrupt and doomed. The OTS was notorious for its secretive and elaborate rituals. Initiation ceremonies drew on Masonic and esoteric traditions, involving symbolic objects such as Templar crosses, swords, and ritual candles. These ceremonies were designed to awaken the inner spiritual power of the initiate and to prepare them for the ultimate journey, the transit. One particularly bizarre practice was that of cosmic coupling or cosmic marriage. Couples were sometimes forcibly separated and repaired by the leaders, supposedly aligning their karmic energies in preparation for the birth of a select group of cosmic children. In one notorious instance, di Mambro even declared that a baby, born to a young follower, was the Antichrist, or a dangerous rival to the destined cosmic Messiah. Such extreme measures underscored the group's total control over personal relationships and individual identity. The Solar Temple was not a loosely knit gathering of individuals, but rather a highly organized network that operated like a secret society. Its organizational structure was layered, with several subgroups or clubs serving as gateways into the inner sanctum of the order. Initially known as the International Order of Chivalric Solar Tradition, the group went by many names as it evolved. Its headquarters moved from Geneva to Zurich, and regional lodges were established in French-speaking parts of Europe, Canada, especially Quebec, and even the French Caribbean. These lodges were responsible for initiation ceremonies and for the local recruitment and indoctrination of new members. One of the striking and disturbing aspects of the Solar Temple was the contrast between the austere, almost ascetic lives led by many of its followers and the opulent lifestyle enjoyed by its leaders. Members, who were often well-to-do professionals, donated substantial sums of money to the order. These funds were not used to benefit the community at large. Instead, Mambro and Jouret used them to finance luxurious lifestyles, purchasing expensive real estate, traveling first class, and even collecting luxury cars such as Ferraris and Lamborghinis. While many followers labored hard in communal farms and lived with shared resources, the leaders were living in stark opulence, an irony that only deepened the mystery and ultimately fueled suspicions. Between 1994 and 1997, the Order of the Solar Temple became infamous for a series of horrific events that left 74 people dead. Although initially thought to be a series of mass suicides, investigations later revealed that many of the deaths involved murder. Let's break down the timeline of these tragic events. On the night of October 4th to 5th, 1994, a fire was discovered in two locations, one in Switzerland and another in Canada. In Switzerland, investigators found 48 bodies in buildings in the remote village of Carey. In Canada, a similar tragedy unfolded at a chalet in Morin Heights, Quebec, where additional bodies were discovered. Initially, authorities suspected that these were the results of mass suicide, a ritualistic transit, as preached by Mambro and Jouret. However, further forensic investigations revealed a more sinister reality. Many of the victims were found to have been murdered, stabbed or shot, before their bodies were burned, while others had been forcibly drugged to render them unconscious before being killed. The leaders had, in effect, categorized their followers into those who were to transit willingly, and those deemed as traitors who were executed to ensure the purity of the collective. Less than a year later, in December 1995, another tragedy struck. In a remote area of France, 16 members of the Solar Temple were found dead. The circumstances of these deaths mirrored the earlier events: ritualistic settings, evidence of drugging, and signs that some victims did not consent to their fate. Investigators later concluded that these deaths were a further execution of the transit doctrine, as the leaders sought to preemptively cleanse the order of any dissenters. The final act came on March 22, 1997, in Saint Casimir, Quebec. In this episode, 5 members of the Solar Temple died in what was presented as a mass suicide. Unlike previous events, however, these deaths involved a harrowing twist. The children of the victims were initially caught up in the suicide attempt. After a failed first attempt, the children intervened, negotiating with their parents and ultimately convincing them not to include the youngest among them in the ritual. The tragic scene unfolded as adults, convinced they must transit to Sirius, set their house on fire in a desperate bid for spiritual ascension, while the children, too drugged to resist initially, later escaped the fatal fate. These successive events were not just isolated incidents of self-destruction. They represented a meticulously orchestrated plan, fueled by apocalyptic ideology and the absolute authority of the leaders. A critical factor in these tragedies was the internal atmosphere of the Solar Temple. As doubts began to surface among some members, especially when key figures like Tony Dutoit, the group's master of special effects who had rigged the miraculous apparitions, chose to leave, the leadership's paranoia grew. Mambro, in particular, viewed any dissent as a betrayal. In one notorious instance, after learning that his own son Ely had begun to question the veracity of the miracles and special effects, Mambro reportedly ordered that traitors be eliminated. In an appalling twist, it is said that a 3-month-old baby was also sacrificed because it was labeled the Antichrist by the cult leaders. Imagine a baby, an innocent child, targeted by a group whose delusional beliefs had spiraled so far out of control that even the youngest life was seen as a threat to their divine destiny. At the center of the Solar Temple's ideology and operations were its two leaders, Joseph di Mambro and Luke Jouret. Though both played critical roles in building the order, they had very different public personas. Di Mambro was the shadowy figure behind much of the order's doctrine. Often described as manipulative and increasingly paranoid, he was the one who maintained ultimate control. His background as a jeweler, coupled with his deep immersion in occult and esoteric ideas, allowed him to craft a narrative that blurred the lines between spiritual revelation and authoritarian control. He was known for issuing orders that would lead to the execution of members labeled as traitors, and his orders were often delivered in a tone that brooked no dissent. In stark contrast, Luke Jouret was the charismatic front man of the order. A popular lecturer and homeopath, Jouret's charm and persuasive abilities enabled him to recruit well-to-do, educated individuals. His public persona was that of a benevolent healer and spiritual guide, yet behind the scenes he worked in concert with di Mambro to enforce the cult's brutal doctrines. Despite his public appeal, Jouret too became enmeshed in the group's internal power struggles and ultimately shared the fate of his co-leader. Di Mambro was the mastermind, secretive, ruthless, and uncompromising, while Jouret was the charismatic spokesman who drew people in with promises of enlightenment and healing. Together, they created an environment where loyalty was enforced through fear, and where the price of dissent was death. Ritual played a central role in the Solar Temple, serving both as a means of indoctrination and as a practical tool to reinforce the belief in transit. Let's take a closer look at some of these rituals and what they signified. New members of the OTS underwent elaborate initiation rituals reminiscent of Masonic ceremonies. Candidates were given oaths, shown symbolic objects, and inducted into layers of esoteric knowledge. The ceremonies were designed to create an intense sense of belonging and to isolate members from outside influences. The ritualistic language and secret symbols not only elevated the status of the order but also created an internal reality that was difficult to question. Central to the OTS was the concept of transit, the idea that death was not an end but a passage to a higher existence on the star Sirius. In group meetings, di Mambro and Jouret preached that as the world faced an imminent apocalypse, only those who would transit could escape the coming destruction. Members were prepared psychologically to view their deaths as a final, transformative act, a metamorphosis that would grant them eternal life in a realm of pure light and energy. In another disturbing practice, the order imposed cosmic marriage on its members. This meant that couples were sometimes separated and repaired in an effort to align their spiritual energies and to produce a generation of cosmic children, future leaders who would carry on the group's divine mission. These forced pairings often resulted in deep personal trauma and further eroded the normal family bonds that might otherwise have provided emotional stability to the members. Through rituals that ranged from initiation oaths to the forced repairing of lovers, the Solar Temple not only dictated every aspect of its members' lives, but also created a reality where death itself was a planned, sacred event. As the 1990s progressed, cracks began to appear within the Solar Temple. Despite the outward appearance of unity and the promises of salvation, internal dissent grew and financial strains began to mount. Some members, after years of total submission, started to question the increasingly erratic behavior of the leaders. When Tony Dutoit, the mastermind behind the group's special effects, who had rigged the miraculous apparitions, left the order and revealed that the apparitions were faked, it sparked a wave of betrayal. Di Mambro could not tolerate dissent. Those who expressed doubts, including his own son Ely, were branded as traitors and in some cases, murdered. Although the group had once boasted hundreds of members and significant financial backing, the lavish lifestyle of its leaders and the constant internal purges began to erode trust. With no new influx of recruits and mounting legal and financial pressures, the leaders saw their empire beginning to crumble. As the membership dwindled, the leaders resorted to extreme measures to force the remaining members into what they called transit. The brutal acts of the Solar Temple caught the attention of not only law enforcement but also the anti-cult movement. Journalists, former members, and cult experts began scrutinizing the order's practices. High-profile media coverage further isolated the group from mainstream society. This external pressure, combined with internal distrust, may have accelerated the leaders' decision to initiate the final acts of transit. When fear, betrayal, and financial collapse converged, the stage was set for a final, catastrophic act, one that would claim 74 lives and forever mark the history of this modern secret society. In the wake of the mass deaths, authorities across Switzerland, France, and Canada launched investigations to uncover the truth behind the Solar Temple's operations. One of the few high-profile legal cases was the trial of Swiss conductor Michel Tabachnik, who had been involved with the group in its early years. Accused of playing a role in brainwashing followers and of having been part of the meetings that led to the tragic transits, Tabachnik was brought to trial in 2001. Despite the intense media scrutiny and the emotional testimony of survivors and families, the court found insufficient evidence to link his writings and lectures to the murderous actions. He was acquitted on all counts, a decision that would later be upheld on appeal. Tabachnik's trial became a lightning rod for controversy. Critics argued that the legal system had failed to hold anyone accountable for the systematic manipulation and the resulting loss of lives. For many relatives of the deceased and anti-cult activists, the acquittal was seen as a gross miscarriage of justice, a sign that the true masterminds behind the order's horrors would never face punishment. Even today, many questions remain. The investigations revealed a tangled web of financial mismanagement, internal purges, and ideological extremism. Some former members and independent researchers continue to speculate that external forces may have been involved or that the leadership had connections to clandestine organizations. Despite extensive forensic and financial investigations, no conclusive evidence has ever emerged to prove that any leader other than Mambro and Jouret was behind the orchestrated transits. In the years following the tragedies, the Solar Temple has become a byword for modern cult extremism, a symbol of how apocalyptic ideologies can lead even educated, affluent individuals to commit unthinkable acts. The events forced governments, especially in Francophone Europe, to take a hard look at the regulation of new religious movements. The legacy of the Solar Temple is complex. For survivors and families, it is a lasting trauma, a painful memory of lost lives and unanswered questions. For scholars, it represents a case study in how charismatic leadership, apocalyptic ideology, and internal dynamics can converge to produce catastrophic outcomes. For law enforcement, it remains a reminder of the challenges in investigating groups that operate in secrecy and across national boundaries. Today, while the organized group as it once existed is defunct, many believe that remnants of its ideology still lurk underground, sometimes surfacing in sporadic incidents or influencing other fringe movements. Even after more than 2 decades, the chilling legacy of the Order of the Solar Temple continues to provoke debate. How did a group of seemingly respectable people come to believe that death was not an end, but a cosmic gateway? The story of the Order of the Solar Temple is a cautionary tale about the power of ideology and the dangers of unchecked charismatic leadership. Several lessons emerge from this dark chapter in modern history. Mambro and Jouret were able to command absolute loyalty through a potent mix of secret knowledge, dramatic rituals, and psychological manipulation. Their authority was so overwhelming that even the most intelligent and well-to-do individuals were drawn in and ultimately sacrificed their lives in the name of transcendence. Apocalyptic ideologies have long held a dangerous appeal, promising salvation and a higher purpose in the face of a crumbling world. For many in the Solar Temple, the promise of transit to Sirius was irresistible. Yet when beliefs become so extreme that they override all basic human instincts for survival and familial love, the result can be catastrophic. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Solar Temple was the group's isolation from external scrutiny. Members were cut off from other viewpoints and encouraged to see dissent as a mortal sin. In today's world, where misinformation and extremist ideologies can spread rapidly, it is more important than ever to foster critical thinking and open dialogue. History teaches us that when ideology goes unchecked, and when leaders manipulate faith for personal gain, the cost can be measured not just in financial ruin, but in human lives. While the organized structure of the Order of the Solar Temple may have crumbled decades ago, its legacy continues to haunt us. The events of 1994, 1995, and 1997 serve as a stark reminder of the dark potential of extreme belief systems, and of the importance of protecting our communities from such destructive forces. Many questions still remain unanswered. How did a group of educated, financially secure individuals come to accept such radical ideas? What role did internal power struggles and the quest for status play in pushing the order to its fatal end? And perhaps most chillingly, the remnants of this ideology still exist today, hidden in the shadows, waiting to re-emerge. For scholars, law enforcement, and even survivors, the Solar Temple case continues to be a source of both study and sorrow. It challenges us to examine the complex interplay between belief, identity, and power, and to ask ourselves, what safeguards can we put in place to prevent another tragedy like this from ever happening again? Today, as we look back at the chilling saga of the Order of the Solar Temple, we are reminded that the line between enlightenment and delusion can sometimes be perilously thin. It is our duty to remember these lessons, and to ensure that we never again allow ideology to eclipse our humanity. Thank you for joining me on this in-depth exploration of the Order of the Solar Temple, a modern secret society whose promise of cosmic transcendence led to unimaginable loss. In our journey, we've seen how charismatic leaders, apocalyptic doctrines, and extreme isolation combined to create a recipe for tragedy. If you found this video enlightening, please hit the like button, subscribe to History Unveiled for more deep dives into historical mysteries, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons do you think we can learn from this tragic episode? And are there modern parallels that we should be watching for? Until next time, stay curious, and remember, history has many secrets waiting to be unveiled.